Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Samir Migueli. I'm the senior curator at the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum. And we're really glad to have what I think will be a pretty incredible lineup of discussants and speakers to be in conversation with us all this evening. This is the third event in our Knowing Our Past, Creating Our Future series that we've been really excited to be able to partner with two organizations to make happen, Current Movements and Visionary Organizing Lab. This particular conversation is an intergenerational one, as we've hoped to make these conversations. But this one in particular is about youth leadership in social movements in DC. And so we've really got an amazing intergenerational group. And I will proceed to introduce our host for this evening and our partners on this event, who will then introduce our speakers and begin the conversation. So as I mentioned, we've been really glad to be able to partner with Current Movements and Visionary Organizing Lab. And so we have as host this evening, the executive directors of both organizations, Katie Petitt with Current Movements and Matt Birkhold with Visionary Organizing Lab. So with that, I will pass the mic over to them. And again, thank you all for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Amir. Hey, yo, my name is Matt Birkhold. About 15 seconds ago, one of the wonderful tech people behind this program, Janelle Cooper, reminded us to take ourselves off mute, and I already forgot to do that, so I was chuckling as I came on. Thanks, Samir. Thanks to the Anacostia Museum. Welcome, everybody. As Samir said, my name is Matt Birkhold. I'm the director of Visionary Organizing Lab, an organization that supports people to become more fully human by building and creating dignity affirming and sustainable economies, institutions, and cultural practices. And we're partnering with Current Movements and the Anacostia Community Museum for a series of programs called Knowing Our Past, Creating Our Future. And tonight is the third installment of that series. We have two more coming up, one this spring in May, I believe, and the following one in September. Tonight, we have a very special conversation. This series of conversations began after a film series that Current Movements, the organization that my comrade here, Katie Petitt, leads. And her and I talked about the need to have longer conversations, intergenerational conversations, particularly rooted in DC's history of institution building. And so our first event was around the history of Black power in DC and the institutions created by Washingtonians, Black Washingtonians specifically, but though not exclusively. And we came to a kind of understanding that DC's colonial history meant that its residents had to develop and cultivate a particular kind of creativity because they didn't have a political body on which to place demands. And so this rich history of community created alternatives took root here. And then our second program was on community control of land of housing, which explored through activist oral histories, intergenerational activist oral histories, how folks have assume community control of land and housing by creating and organizing limited equity co-ops and community land trusts and the role of protest and political struggle in making those things legal. And so tonight, we are focused on the second very explicit goal of this series, to facilitate intergenerational conversation about the history of social movements in Washington, D.C. And so that's why we're here tonight, knowing our past, creating our future, and youth leadership in Washington, D.C. social movements. And I'll pass it over to Katie to introduce herself and to introduce our wonderful discussants tonight.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. And I just want to give a warm thank you for taking the time to be with us this beautiful Thursday, warmer evening. And yeah, this is a really special event. It's definitely one that we've been kind of building towards throughout the series, in that it is a deeply intergenerational conversation, and you'll be able to see that as the evening goes on. And we're just really grateful to all of our panelists, and I will read their bios now. And panelists, as I read your bios, you can put yourself or turn on your video, and you can also unmute when we begin the questions. And I also just want to invite the audience to use the chat box as a way to communicate with us, ask questions, share other bits of wisdom that you might have from your own experience organizing as a young person, if that's the case. So just wanting to make that space available for ongoing conversation this evening. And we will have time to take your questions at the end of the program. So I first want to start by introducing you to Courtland Cox. Courtland Cox spent his childhood between New York and Trinidad. Education was important to his family, and they sent him to St. Helena's Catholic School, where for 1 year he was the only Black student. When Cox arrived at Howard University in 1960, he joined the Nonviolent Action Group, or NAG. Already committed to fight segregation and white supremacy, Cox met classmates like Stokely Carmichael, Ed Brown, Michael Thelwell, Jane Wheeler, and others as NAG became involved in sit-ins along Route 40, freedom rides, and demonstrations on Maryland's Eastern Shore. Cox is on the board of the directors for the SNCC Legacy Project. If you haven't checked that website out, I highly recommend it. It has a lot of really beautiful learnings and history. And after becoming a member a student at Howard University, he worked with SNCC in Mississippi and Lowndes County, Alabama, was the program secretary for SNCC in 1962, and was the SNCC representative to the War Crimes Tribunal organized by Bertman Russell. In 1963, he served as the SNCC representative on the steering committee for the March on Washington. And in 1973, Mr. Cox served as the Secretary General of the 6th Pan-African Congress and International Meeting of African People in Tanzania. He co-owned and managed the Drum and Spear bookstore and Drum and Spear Press. Cox is presently a consultant with the DC Public Schools. So a lot of these really great things, including Drum and Spear, and the Pan-African work that happened in DC are mentioned in our first panel discussion. So if you haven't seen that from this summer, please go back to the Smithsonian's Facebook event after, not now, but later on, maybe this weekend, and check out that discussion. So our second panelist is Chai, tell me again, Chai
Latte.
Chai Hughes is a pioneer in the field of AIDS education and prevention, beginning with her work in 1985 at Whitman Walker Clinic here in Washington, DC. From South Central Los Angeles to Juarez, Mexico, to Madrid, South Africa, Hughes has synthesized culture, context, and community to create HIV prevention, education, and treatment interventions. In addition to penning articles on HIV and AIDS, Hughes served as a HIV/AIDS guest editor at Hayworth Press. Her early activism in HIV/AIDS and in the LGBT community has earned recognition and awards, including the Rainbow Histories Project's Community Pioneers Award in 2015. She currently lives in Fayetteville, Georgia, where she enjoys local activism, creative writings, gardening, and a charmed life with her partner, friends, and family. She is grateful for the opportunity to be a change agent through championing healthy communities for all people. Thank you for being here. And Dion Harrison, our third guest, is a teaching artist on a journey of personal healing through creativity, both on stage and with the written word. As a Washington, D.C. native, Dion found that validation of his experience with age, race, violence, sexuality, and spirituality would not be given to him as a queer Black man. for whom the price of peace and safety is almost any community, in almost any community, is erasure. Knowing that this battle to be seen does not begin or end with him, Dion's work in community activism and platform creation aims to expand the definition of reality, its potential, and possesses the question, what do we actually do about it? So we're really honored to be joined by this great panel this evening, and we're excited to start the questions. So Matt, do you want to get into it?
Yeah, thank you, Katie. And once again, thanks y'all, all of y'all for being here. It's clear that we have, you know, 3 different generations of folks who lived in 3 different worlds. And so I'm really excited to see what emerges from this conversation. And we'll start, I'm gonna ask everybody this question, but I wanna start with Chai and who represents the kind of middle stratum of folks. And then we'll go to Dion, who represents the youngest of the represented generations here. And then we'll go to Courtland, who represents the most seasoned amongst us. And so I want to start. Chai, can you tell us how you got involved in the movement or in movement organizing?
Specifically, the LGBTQ community, I got involved because I was looking for people like me. We're talking about in the late 70s, early 80s to mid 80s. There were not organizations that spoke to the experience of African-American LGBT people. And I really organized out of a selfish reason, which is that I wanted to learn more about my community.
Thank you, Chai. Thank you. Dion, how did you get involved in the movement or in movement organizing?
I just want to say out loud first, I'm honored and excited to get that out of my body. Or get into that probably more deeply. But how did I get involved in the movement? Just hearing things on the news or seeing things like happen repeatedly, like whether in my actual like day-to-day life or things that I see on media. And I think just around like the time Trayvon Martin had passed, was killed, and like just all of the things with justice that my family, who doesn't usually talk about things like that, starting to have those conversations and seeing how close it was, seeing that the things that I was learning about in history class were actually happening in real life. When marches started and protests started happening, I got involved physically in those. Then I moved from being really present in protests, like not as much organizing, but just coming out and handing out waters, or just being really loud and being really present in that, to doing a lot of educational work, and doing a lot of organizing work and community building and different things like that, while also figuring out how I felt inside of my body. I was connecting to other people.
Thank you, Dion. Thank you. I ain't never met such short-winded organizers. That's amazing. Y'all make having a collective conversation real easy and efficient. Courtland, last but not least, how did you get involved in the movement? And brother King, we need you to unmute yourself, Courtland. Thank you.
I got involved in the movement because everywhere I turned, there were barriers. If I wanted to, I mean, when I came, since we're talking about Washington, let's talk about Washington. I came to Washington I was 19 years old. And so, I mean, there were no black bus drivers because the person who owned the bus driver, O'Roy Chalk, said that black people would steal the money. Black people couldn't try on clothes in department stores. They had to buy them without trying them on. Black policemen, in some places, black policemen couldn't ride in cars. If you were looking at housing, there was segregated housing. Most of Northwest Washington was off limits to black people. If you wanted a bite to eat, there were only probably 2 sit-down restaurants in the whole of Washington that would accommodate black people. So I mean, and then the district government was run by, you know, the Congress of the United States. So that if you wanted a decent job in the district government, you couldn't get there because most of the decent jobs were all filled by people who were friends of congressional people and people particularly in people who were coming out of the military. There were a lot of colonels who were running a lot of the agencies here. Um, you know, and then there was, I mean, the Washington football team had no black players on it. I mean, so, I mean, if you looked around everywhere, there were barriers everywhere. And I'm talking about Washington. I mean, if we want to go outside of Washington, I mean, traveling, if I were traveling from New York to Washington, where I'm from New York, you know, it was Route 40. It wasn't, they didn't have 195, which is the big highway now. But if I were traveling from New York to Washington, I could not stop because you could not have any public accommodations. If I were traveling in the South, you know, I'd have to sit in, you know, in a bus from here south, I'd have to sit in the back of the bus. So as I see it, I mean, at 19 years old, you either, if you had any kind of ambition, the barriers were so overwhelming that you had to do something. It wasn't a particular thing. Everywhere you look, every place you try to go, I mean, any ambition that you had was stifled. I mean, let's talk about the school systems. There were 2-track systems. Most Black people were put in a track that led to vocational education because most people said, why waste time on a Black person with an academic education? Because all they're going to be doing is vocational work. So, I mean, I think of any person who desired to move and not be constrained by all of these barriers had to join a movement to put an end to the barriers.
Thank you. Yeah, I think as a Black activist myself, that all of your stories really resonate with me. And something that I'm interested to hear from each of you is, how did you come to believe in your power and the power of people more generally to change the world? So a lot of you talked about like your own experiences of why you needed to get into it. But I think so many people stop at like, the world is messed up and I don't know what to do about it. But the three of you and the organizations that you worked within all said, no, I actually have something to offer to make my situation and the situations of others like me a bit better. And so can you talk about what that was like when you realized that you and others had the power to make change?
Would you want to start?
Go for it, Courtland.
Okay. So, I mean, after coming to the realization that all the barriers were there, then you had to you had to make a decision, because all the barriers were there because they were not only backed up by law, but they were backed up by force and violence. So therefore, let's say you decided to go and sit in, and you knew that in fact you were going to be beat up because of you're just sitting there asking for a hamburger and a Coke. And to add insult to injury, you had to dress up because you had to put on your suit and tie because, you know, people did not want to feel that Black people would be threatening. So if you had a suit and tie on, you would feel less threatening. But I mean, we decided that in order to make sure what we wanted to do would happen, we would do a number of things, even though in our own heart, I mean, both in terms of nonviolence and in terms of the kind of things that we had to do, you know, we decided that those things had to be done. I mean, you take a guy like Hank Thomas and John Lewis and Stokely and Carmichael and people like that who went on the freedom rides. You know, they knew that going on the freedom rides, you know, they would be beat up and brutalized. And in fact, the bus was burned and people were nearly killed. So what we had to overcome, and the most important thing for young people, I mean, at that time, you know, we were generally between 17 and 22. But the most important thing that we had to show those who had constructed these barriers, we were not going to be afraid of two things. We weren't going to be afraid of their violence, and we're going to not be afraid of their jails. So for example, when people went to Mississippi and Robert Kennedy and the governor of Mississippi decided, all right, let's put these people in jail in Parchment Penitentiary, a notorious place, what happened is that the young people said, okay, we're not going to be scared. We're going to invite everybody to come to this jail. We're going to fill up this jail. We're going to break it. So it was a contest of wills. It played out in the sit-ins and the freedom rides, but in the early days, it's whose will was going to prevail, whether it's going to be the segregationists or whether it's going to be us. I just want to make one other little statement. We're not talking about I'm mentioning stuff in 1960s, but if you look at January 6th and the aftermath of January 6th in 2020, what really is at stake is whose will is going to prevail. I mean, whether you're going to have a continued minority rule, because trust me, people focused on the one Confederate flag. I don't focus on that. I focus on the American flags that were there, because most of the people who went in there thought they were the real America. And the question of whose will prevail in this discussion is very important.
So much. Shai or Dion?
Yeah, it's a really important question, this idea of power and believing that you have power to change things. I remember being maybe about 10, 11 years old in New York and wanted to have a paper route, something as simple as back in the day, people delivered papers, they threw them to your door or something like that. Girls were not allowed to have paper routes. Okay, so I was a little upset. I went to my dad and I was like, Dad, you know, why can't I? There was a demonstration that was going to happen down at the newspaper one Saturday morning. And I said, Dad, would you take me? Can we go? Because this is not right. Girls should be able to earn money too. And that's when, and I went, he took me, and I realized that you can do something about things that you think are not correct, that are not just. At an early age, I learned that you do have power. You have a voice. It's louder when you share it with other people. So I had to try to address issues of sexism, racism, and then homophobia. And so at times you're never really sure which one you're addressing. What is the ism of the day? And so that though told me you do have power as an individual. And then when I would go into other situations, I realized that I could speak up. I could say that, you know, in Washington, D.C., in the late 70s, early 80s, there were not safe spaces for women of color to go. And we formed Sapphire Sapphos as a place for women of color, back then we said third world women. We were welcoming all third world sisters and creating a space, saying that yes, we are part of the larger LGBTQ community. We have a voice. We want to create a space where people can come who look like us, who share similar politics, culture. Women had children, across the spectrum of how we identify as gay women or lesbians, all were invited. And we showed Washington, D.C. that it's not just about white gay men. And we're here in D.C., Chocolate City, as it was called back then. We had the numbers in our favor. And we had the voices, we were able to collect the voices to be able to speak out and say, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. And we deserve to have a space just like everybody else, which goes into the organizing at Howard University to have the first Black LGBTQ organization on an HBCU. Again, this sense that it's not right that we as Black students who pay our dues don't have an organization that represents us. You think you're in a safe space because it's Black, we're Black, but as LGBTQ folks, we're marginalized even in this environment. But whoa, hey, wait a minute, we have a voice, we have a collective voice, and we're going to stand up to Howard and say, we deserve to have a place too. So I'm gonna stop there because Matt already said that we're doing such a great job of shortening the responses.
Short-winded.
Well, I want to, before we move to Dion, I want to also just highlight. So I was within the Black Lives Matter DC organizing collective for a few years, the Movement for Black Lives DC, and we gained so much of our understanding and our power from the SNCC organizing and the Black Power organizing that happened with Courtland and in Courtland's day, as well as so BLM is a deeply queer feminist organization, and so the work that UCHI have done we're a part of within Howard and within Sapphire Sapphos were very, very important to us, and just really, really grateful. And Dion with the Black Swan Academy, it's definitely a sister organization to Black Lives Matter, or a sibling organization. And it's just really beautiful to see folks who are even younger than I am come up and just do really beautiful and powerful work here in the city in our day, talking about like what's next and pushing our movements forward. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about when you realized that you had the ability to make a change and you could step into your power?
There were so many instances, small scales and big scales, and I connect a lot of things in my life to each other. So I think the first thing that came up for me, or like when did I first feel that I had power, I think of moments where like actually at the moment I felt opposite. I felt like I was being victimized by what. Can you hear me clearly now? My bad, let me get closer. Can you hear me clearly? Yeah, just moments of like, of understanding the power of me being the firstborn of my parents, them being teen parents at the time. Now I'm in the dark, but them being teen parents at the time, and eventually me having like a little sister. There was the power of having a family around me, of having people who wanted to see me do well, who like had dignity and respect for themselves, who didn't necessarily like being told what to do, who felt like they were capable of protecting themselves. That was instilled in me. And then I think in the same sense, it was also tested. I wouldn't say like people like necessarily had it out for me, but just like life circumstances, or God within itself, challenging the things that my family instilled in me, where I was also questioning the connections that I had with people and with myself, questioning the value that I held within the world, questioning whether I could protect myself, whether I could make decisions, or like just so many things, so many questions. But like I knew that I had power when I was facing like the darkest moments and I was still breathing, or like I made it over those moments. Or like looking back, I think of how many things I thought would kill me, or like I just thought that I would feel in that same way forever. And then when I say that out loud, I know that isn't the case. And I think that's where the power comes from, is that in those moments, there was like a light that came on that felt like okay, this is the lesson that I need to learn. And that is on scales. I like stories as well. So I'm thinking of all the things that I could talk about. But I think of having a stutter when I was younger and coming to a place where I could speak up for myself, whether emotionally or within a classroom, begin to get into debates, begin to perform musically or like with acting or dancing and all of those things, and constantly feeling like I'm being pushed down or like pointed in the opposite direction, which felt like internal slavery to me. I was dramatic, but I was also perceptive with how like oppression had transformed over time, where um, everything looks like freedom, but what it feels like is not free. So my ability to recognize that and then to make different decisions and to inspire people in my family or people within classrooms, whether I was trying to or not, those type of things made me feel like there was a purpose for all of those moments. Yeah, and all of those things within themselves, like singing, made me feel powerful. Being able to connect emotionally to a song or to a feeling, and to share that and to inspire a feeling within other people, whether that's to check into something that feels heavy or to check into something that feels like release. That feels powerful to me. Is telling those stories or hearing other people's stories and to advocate for those things. I did a lot of advocating within my family or even just for my own personal autonomy before I began to advocate for like the rest of the world or the rest of the people around me. And there was also a long time before I even started to change the world that I was changing myself, and putting up, trying to stay out of like a guarded place, but trying to remember how protected I am. Trying to make decisions for myself, but also staying open to what I hear and what I learn. It allowed me to like, gosh, I feel like I'm rambling, but it's beautiful, and there's so many opportunities that empower me with a lot of different things. And mainly, I think just the trust and the willingness to keep going forward and to gain and release more and to understand more in defining power, defining myself, defining these experiences as well. Because things that made me feel very unpowerful, all the tears, all the questions, all of those things, it feels amazing to rest and to be alive and to laugh. Mm.
Thanks, Dion. Thanks, Shai. Thanks, Courtland. I want to thank you all for, you know, the personal and all very different answers you provided to that same question. And that's, I hope we might be able to talk about how we might understand some of those differences and similarities as we move forward. You know, I myself, I think I became convinced of a collective power to transform the world far before I came to recognize my power as an individual human being through a little bit of knowledge of the history of movements. And so I called myself, so I became an organizer, and I couldn't organize a sock drawer because I might have had some faith in power, but I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't have a clue. And in my case, I was blessed enough to have old heads that came out of the Black Power movement in Philadelphia and New York and Detroit, who took me under their wing, and you know, they told me what to study. They shared with me a sense of history and shared their stories with me. And so I'm wondering if you all might speak to how you developed an understanding of how to use your power usefully, and what role movement elders or elders more generally might have played in you developing that understanding. And we'll start with Dion, and then go to Chai, and then we'll go to Courtland.
elders, not even like really old people, but like just angels, teachers throughout school who like just directed my ability to ask questions or to care just a little bit deeper about like what's happening externally and internally for myself and for other people. There were so many like different programs. I think of City at Peace, which is an amazing like theater program that brings together like a diverse cast of young people in high school. And we talk about all of the isms and we talk about different experiences in our life that connects to those things. And we create like from this cast of young people and a few older people, we create a play that is challenging and beautiful and so many other words. So that program, which I did through the end of high school and like right after, like just random things that came up, like the Aspen Challenge, which isn't that random, it's probably so well known, but the Aspen Challenge just came into my life when I was going to Eastern, and I got to like just think creatively with people about things that matter on a larger scale, whether it was like water or environmental issues or food availability in different communities. We got to think creatively, and just different things that I had envisioned or wanted to like write about in my own notes, wanted to like see happen like way in the future. Opportunities provided themselves for like them to like materialize. And then they connected to each other over time. So there were programs where I got to maybe cook and eat food, and it wasn't about organizing and activism, but I learned about the community building. I learned about how we share power, how we interact in learning and in teaching. I learned about nutrition and all of these things, which then kind of reflects to when I get older and I recognize like just how empowering it is for people to be able to build communities for themselves, to be able to provide themselves with good food and nutrition, or at least have the knowledge and the resources in order to do that. So things that just felt like, oh, this is a cool experience right now, they connected like Legos, like Legos. And those are just like, those are old experiences that I didn't know how they were shaping me in those moments, or I just saw it as shaping me as an artist to be able to write songs eventually. But it connected like seamlessly to when I wanted to continue the feeling of connectivity that I got from a protest, and feeling people's truth and knowing that people cared at the same time and were ready to go forward. Like I know how music can do the same thing, and how movies and books and interviews and all these things can do the same thing. And I started to realize that I could combine the parts of myself that had so much to complain about and so many stories to tell, that cared and connected, or that were tired of seeing the same thing. Like all of those things, they made more sense in the long run, like why I was not just one type of person doing one type of thing.
Nice.
It was just help, random angels, fifth grade reading teachers, clubs, opportunities.
Thank you, Dion. Thank you. Chai?
Sure. I want to start by honoring and respecting my great-grandfather, because he basically was the one who, someone I looked up to because of what he did. And what he did was start a school in Loudoun County, which is, Courtland was saying, he had done some work down there in Alabama, during a time, the early 1900s, when Black folks, children did not have access to schools in the South. And I hope you can see this picture. I want to show it to you. If you can see, this is in fact my grandfather and the class, and you can, in the school, and you can see that they're varying ages of people, and that he just brought them together to educate them. And that, to me, I learned was it was a heroic thing to do. He got one of the grants that was made available through the Rosenwald Foundation, I think it was called, and they were putting money in the South for people to create schools for African Americans. And my grandfather was one of the recipients. So I want to give a shout out to him for his activism and making it important for our family to respect education and see that as one road to get to freedom, equity, activism, you name it. And then there's the Reverend in my church, Reverend Hogan, in the 70s, when Angela Davis, one of my just idols, was on the run, literally on the FBI's most wanted list. I remember him saying from the pulpit, I think we said a prayer for her safety. You know? And I thought, wow, that is incredible, that a clergy person would bring us together in the church to pray for this person who was an outlaw, if you will, but he was giving her value, he was raising her up, and she became someone that was larger than life for me as an example of activism, whether people wanted to say it was criminal activity or whether it was for the sake of raising our awareness and consciousness about the plight of Black folks. He said unequivocally, we're going to pray for her. We're going to pray for her safety. And that felt good, and that felt powerful, and an endorsement of someone and an acknowledgement that we may not all see heroes in the same way. Because again, I have a poster upstairs of her wanted, FBI most wanted poster. And then to move fast forward in the late 80s, when the African-American LGBT community in Los Angeles decided that we were going to have a first conference, who was our keynote speaker? Matt, who do you think our keynote speaker was? Angela Davis.
I was gonna say that, but I couldn't find the unmute button.
Oh, fast enough, okay. Well, it was Angela Davis, and that just meant the world to me. That this person who was powerful and part of the movement in ways that were radical would lend her voice to the LGBTQ community and the work that we were doing. So that idea, and Audre Lorde, I see you've got the Audre Lorde poster there behind you, another one of my sheroes. And understanding the power of art in the movement. Reading her work, reading her works, talking about the community that was created and why and the how was just very, very encouraging and powerful. She then, as you may or may not know, came to Sapphire Sapphos when we were having an event at the coffee house, and she hung out with us. She hung out with us. She was in DC to speak at the, the Library of Congress, I think. She was speaking and reading some of her work, and then afterward, she came and hung out at the coffee house with Sapphire Sapphos. We hosted an event for her. So just the idea of having people that are doing stuff that you can look up to and say, hey, if they can do it, maybe I can do it. And the other thing that Audre Lorde said that was so incredible and powerful for me was, when I dare to be, I'm not saying it's verbatim, but it's the intent of it stays with me. And that is that when I dare to be powerful, to use I think it's when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it's less important whether I am afraid. And the idea that if I have a vision for what I believe is good, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It doesn't matter if you're afraid, just go ahead and get out there and do it. And when we get further into the conversation about the importance of youth and youth activism, I'll revisit that. So yeah, a lot of powerful people that were doing things, showing me how to do things from my great-grandfather on, really encouraged me to explore my own power and use it.
Thanks, Shai. Courtland?
I found myself to be very fortunate because I just, as the previous two speakers, I had role models in a lot of areas. I think of my grandmother and my grandfather, and the one thing they said to me is, never put yourself in a position to see if you have to determine if someone is vexed or pleased. So they always drilled into me that you should never be in a subordinate position. You should always try to be in control of your life. I mean, and they've told me that when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. So I grew up with that. I mean, you know, all this time, I've never forgotten that. I think as the two speakers have talked, the importance of culture, that I think that's, I mean, to me, and having people who help, you know, you understand the culture, the arts, the music, and so forth. And I was very fortunate in that, because when you think about culture and you think about movement, while you can act as an individual, I think the culture and the feeling of togetherness is something that holds you together over the long term. And I was very fortunate because I had Sterling Brown, who was at Howard University at the time I was there. And Sterling Brown was an expert on the blues. So he would come to the dormitory that we lived in Slow Hall and bring his records, his long-term records. They had records at that time. And he would talk about the blues, and he would give a lecture and play the blues. He also knew about jazz, and he'd do the same thing. He also was a great poet. And for those who are listening, should go to look at some of the poetry of Sterling Brown, a particularly strong man, and so forth. So I mean, so on the cultural level, we had people who would really help us, and also a person who I didn't have really hands-on, but didn't know, was James Baldwin, who came to Howard to speak, and also we were able to invite him to be on a symposium with Ossie Davis and John Killens while we were at Howard in 1961 to talk about Whither the Negro Rider. So we had that in, you know, intellectually and culturally. I think the person who was the most influential in my life in terms politically was Bayard Rustin. And Bayard Rustin was probably the smartest person I've ever met politically. But as you know, being gay in the 1950s and 60s was always a question of morality and immorality. And people like both Baldwin and Bayard were always being abused by a bunch of people, both in the Black and the white communities. But Bayard, fortunately, had the cover of A. Philip Randolph. And A. Philip Randolph gave Bayard Rustin a great deal of cover to move politically. And when we were students at Howard University, we had Bayard come to debate Malcolm X on the issue of separation versus integration. But also, more importantly, whenever we ran into political issues, particularly from the people who were Stalinists and Trotskyites, I mean, you don't even know all these people at this point, but BOUT would help us maneuver how we were able to engage these people politically. So I think I was very fortunate that, you know, I had people who, both my grandparents on the cultural level and on the political level, who were able to help me understand the world. And I think the other person I would say who was very helpful to us, clearly very, very helpful to us, is Ella Baker. And Ella Baker didn't say a lot. And she spent, I mean, at that time, you know, the SNCC people like to talk a lot. A short meeting would be a 10-hour meeting. And in those days, you could smoke indoors. So I mean, people are now wearing masks, but she had to wear masks at that time. But she would help guide us, and being people who were 16, 17, 18, 19, she would help guide us in a direction that told us that everything that you see before you is not the problem. Look to the long term. Look to what is more than a hamburger. Look to understanding the big picture. And she was able to help us in that regard. So I must say we were very, very fortunate. At least I was very, very fortunate to have people who were able to be helpful to me at you know, helping tutor me and helping me understand. And you know, now when people talk about them, I see them as people who were friends and people who were helpful, and people see them as historical figures. But to me, they, you know, they're Bayard, Miss Baker, you know, Sterling Brown. They were just people I knew, but they, you know, but they were historical figures.
That's beautiful.
I love it. I love this conversation so much, and the intersections, and how it almost feels, I can feel in this conversation the fluidity of our movement and our struggle, as it goes from one generation to the next and then intertwines, and we learn and grow together. It feels very cyclical more than it is linear sometimes. Great. So I want to combine the next couple questions, and ask each of you to reflect on your own experience as you answer these two combined questions. So why is reflecting important, and why is youth leadership important? And Dion, we'll start with you again. And if you could talk a little bit more about Black Swan Academy and let folks know, like, what is the organizing work that is happening? How did it get started? And kind of your role in that organizing there in Anacostia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Black Swan Academy is an organization that focuses mainly on civic engagement. Can y'all hear me? I really get into a soft tone. That's like my comfort area. But Black Swan Academy is an organization that works directly with youth leadership. That's like the goal, to foster pride, purpose, and power within young people, young Black folk, specifically living in Ward 7 and 8, which is where I live. That's where I grew up for the most part. This is the part of DC that's underserved, not as updated as far as like the school systems and different things like that. This might be where like a lot of metal detectors and things lie. This is where a lot of gun violence happens in our communities. And it's not the only place, but it's like it's the gosh, it's just a small representation of what happens all over the city and all over the country. And Black Swan Academy is an organization that was started by Samantha Davis and a handful of other activists and organizers in the area about 5 years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago. And the organization has grown from working specifically with a few middle schools within DC. This is like Sousa and Kramer, to now being connected with middle schools, high schools, and last year was the first year that students who had went through Black Swan, who had started the organization alongside Sam, the first cohort, had graduated from high school and were able to go to college. Some of them were also able to organize from their schools or from home with the organization. And this work looks a lot like, well, for me, I was a cohort lead for the 9th and 10th grade. So my first year, I started off moving from another youth-led, youth-centered group, less formal, not paid, and just really passion-driven, called Melanin Uprising. And I got connected through Black Swan Academy because we were able to build some workshops at the Boys and Girls Club and to talk about community building and community agreements and what safety looks like and what power looks like and different things like that. So some of the young people that I met during those sessions during the summer, I actually got to begin to work more closely with them. So on Mondays and Wednesdays, we'll meet at the library, the neighborhood library, and talk about all the things, and what types of advocacy opportunities were coming up, whether that was at the council's office, while we tried to build connections with them as an organization, as well as having young people having experience talking to, knowing about, and being familiar with the political systems within DC, to begin to like speak directly to those decision makers and to make decisions, to advocate for themselves. And a lot of the work that we've done through the Black Youth Agenda, which is something that we go on a retreat, which is just a weekend of not relaxing, more so like really getting to the root of like what matters to the young people specifically. Like we ship it and we're with them, but it's mainly what their personal values are and what their personal experiences are. And we create those platforms, and we help to guide them in the process of building the movement themselves. So a lot of the things that we've talked about is youth experiences with homelessness. This is youth centered, but as well as like their families and their communities, but experiences with homelessness, with police in schools, with the one thing that was really a really powerful campaign was our Let Me Vent campaign, and that spoke to not only the overall environment of schools being more centered around education and the empowerment of young people, but for them to literally have mental health professionals within the schools more so than security guards, moving from something that attacked young people or policed young people or criminalized young people. We began to change the conversation to something that was more preventative, to something that was honoring all of the people inside of the environment and creating an environment that isn't like afraid of things going bad all the time, but actually creates the community where things go well, where things are healthy, where things are beautiful. And that's the type of things that Black Swan Academy wants to see happen in real life. And those processes are very long. Well, they're not very long. There are so many small wins. There's money that is won. Ooh, so there's money that is won. There is conversations that are started. Young people are actually, well, I feel like that in a way we've always been heard or felt or seen, but like there's more respect for the experiences of young people and the ways that they want to create new experiences in new communities, new schools, and things like that. So that is Black Swan Academy. And I've actually just transitioned from being the 9th and 10th grade cohort co-lead into working a lot more with the arts and culture aspect of the organization. So using that as a advocacy tool, as well as like the way of expressing all these things that we can begin to think about and begin to familiarize ourselves with. And that has been amazing. It's been social emotional learning. It's been the empowerment, the rest, and the creative part of movement building and of changing the world. It's the part where we actually imagine and feel what it feels like to be in the world that we want to create through and after all of the fighting and all of the yelling and all of the change. Amazing. And reflection has been important in this process because I am currently, at this very moment, I'm 23. I'm 23 years old, and I went very quickly from like being a young person, experiencing like the gifts and the tools and the teachings of people who wanted to see me do better, and like trying to access and maintain all of those things, but I was also sharing it, and I shifted really fast into like thinking of myself as like a teacher, or is very interesting. I think reflection has, in the long run, after these years of being disappointed with like beginning to understand what a leader means, what it means to lead and work with young folk, while also being a young folk and being an adult figure. There was like reflection has helped me to like respect everyone in the room, to be patient with myself and to be patient with others, to be present, to try different things. There was so much that was changing, whether or not I was in this role. Yes, okay. Sorry. I thought you wanted to get me off. But there was just so much development, like leadership development. I feel like I might have always been a leader in a sense, but I aimed high, and the learning experience of it was like a beautiful thing that helped me to like relax in certain ways and step up in other ways. There's a just coming from high school, or just coming from like teenage years, what I'm used to from teachers and adults is policing. And it's not called that, it's called like guiding or parenting, but like there's thin lines and there's dimensions to things. And doing like the freedom work of like having a literal conversation with 9th and 10th graders, like, these are our community agreements. This is how we should respect each other. We don't want to police you. Let's get police out of schools. But then in actual action and in conversation, I had to really reflect on like getting the policing out of the way that I move, the way that I look at myself, and the way that I look at the people that I want to lead, not only lead for, lead with, and be led by.
I love it. Thank you so much, Dion, and thanks for getting deeper into the work of Black Swan Academy. And I really hope people check out the work that you all are doing. It's just really beautiful and important. And as I said before, like just a continuation of the work that has come before. So I want to jump in and pass it over to Chai.
I've had about 100 years to reflect now. And I've come to a couple of conclusions. One is that I want to get to the HIV and AIDS started as a pandemic, epidemic in DC back in the early 80s. I know that's what was in my bio, so I want to speak a little bit about that in terms of reflecting. it was so important to be in DC and talk about HIV and AIDS in the 80s because there was the thought that it was a white gay male disease. And again, if you know anything about DC in the 70s, 80s, 60s, you know that it was primarily African-American people in that city. So to say that this was a white gay male disease kind of gave Black gay men and Black folks a pass, if you will, to not engage in safe behavior, all that kind of stuff. So the importance of having an LGBTQ community to stand up and say, this is not a white gay male disease. As a lesbian, I was watching my Black gay male friends transpire. So I knew firsthand that this was not a white gay male disease. And so how do we get the word out to our community? And fortunately, you know, people like Ron Simmons, who created Us Helping Us for Black gay men, came out of the early organizing around LGBT folks, Black folks in Washington, DC. You know, he passed last year and he left a mark, but he was able to do that because there were people who were willing to come out and say, we're Black, we're gay, this is affecting our community. We need to get resources into our community. We need to get education. We need to, the nurses, the PAs, the doctors need to be able to speak to it. And when at that time, Marion Barry needed Black folks to be the face of where the community could go relative to HIV and AIDS, there were people who were out and willing to step forward and say, our community, yes, we need to pay very close attention to this. In about 1986, I worked at the Whitman Walker Clinic in mid-80s. As controversial as that may have been, I still believe, again, reflecting, that it was good to have Black people there because we could consistently say there's not enough resources in Anacostia. You know, we know that. We know what that community is like, and there needs to be resources over there. We did one of the first conferences, the first conference for women in HIV in 1986. We got a small grant from the Roth Family Foundation that wanted to focus specifically on women in HIV in 86. So it's so important reflecting, and Dion, this idea of building upon the shoulders of those who've gone before. Hopefully we have done a sufficient job of clearing the path a little bit. And so around HIV and AIDS in Washington, DC, I believe it was very important to have Black folks who were saying, this is something we need to be aware of. Now here in Atlanta, when I first got here to Atlanta area, I felt like I was, and don't tell my people in Atlanta, okay? But I felt like I was stepping back into 1985 in a lot of ways in addressing HIV and AIDS. So reflecting, I've had a lot of time to reflect, and hopefully I'll have a lot more time to reflect, but it is important that we're visible and that we hold a place so that those who come later have examples and see examples of fighting through your fear, fighting through the naysayers. And then knowing that at some point in time, Dion, you will be in my seat talking to people about the importance of organizing and reflecting on your experience. So I think reflection is very important, and I will continue to reflect because I get new lessons as I evolve, and I'm able to share those when organizations like yours invite me as the old head to come in and talk about experience. So I do appreciate that very much.
Great, thanks so much. Courtland?
Yeah, I think when we talk about reflections, there is a saying that if you don't know where you're going, any bus will take you there. And if you don't understand what you're trying to do and beginning to understand and trying to think about what you have done and is it taking you on the path that where you need to go, you can keep going, and all motion is in progress. So that we need to understand that. I think some of the things that I've learned, I mean, I think probably the most humbling experience I've learned in all my time in this journey is that you can do everything that is necessary, that you see necessary, that you see before you, but it will not be sufficient to deal with the overall problems that have to be faced by our people. So all the things that I saw when I was a young person, all the things I wanted to do, I have done in a lot of ways. Well, not all of them, but many of them. But I also know that Dion has a long way to go, and the point that Chai just made, that Dion will be where Chai is and Chai will be where I am. And, at some point, in fact, it's interesting, if you keep on the path, one of the things you begin to realize is that you become the persons that you used to admire. So that the generations preceding you will view you the way you viewed Angela Davis. And then people, but the important thing is that while you're not Angela Davis, you're keeping, as Jesse Jackson used to say, you're keeping the hope alive. You're keeping it in such a way that there is a clear path. So even if I'm not in the cultural area, but I think the sense of being able to express and have room to do what you want to do is important. Even if you're not gay, but understanding that the brutality against one group of people is also the brutality against you. Even if you're not Black, understanding that if there is, I mean, you see it all today. This is not hypothetical. The whole attempt to suppress the Black vote by the Trump people and the Republicans is causing what we see today. So my sense is that the whole sense of suppression is destructive to the whole community. And people all think that they can get an edge by doing it, but I just think that as we begin to see and reflect, I think what we have to be able to do in terms of our reflection is think in terms of the broadest perspectives that we can get, and understand that, I used to listen to King. I used to be amazed at King. I would go listen to him in the church, the mass meetings, and I would sit down and be amazed about how he could speak, how he used alliteration, how he would, roll this up and get into a thing about, but he always said about, this whole question of humanity is interwoven with each other. And I think we have to have that perspective. The other, while I'm quoting King, I think Chai said this in some respects, but I think King says it in the last speech that he made. He said, I may not get there with you, but our people will get there together at some point. And I think, again, in terms of perspective, there, when I was coming up in the 60s and so forth, there were a lot of people who were World War II generation people. And they knew that they may not be able to see Black people vote, but they were going to do the best they could to get us there, because they could have never even conceived of a Black president. They could have never conceived of a Black woman being, vice president. But they knew if they did something and kept it going, something good would happen. So we have to have that belief, that kind of perspective. So I'm saying that I think reflections are really important, because as I started the discussion by saying that if you don't know where you're going, any bus will take you there. You've got to know where you're going. That's the most critical thing.
Thank you, Courtland. Thank you, Chai. Thank you, Dion. This has been an amazing conversation. We ain't over yet. It's unfortunate, I want the audience to, none of us knew each other before 6 p.m., before 30 minutes before this conversation started. And Dion had the graciousness to get Maya, who was originally scheduled to be with us, had an emergency, she couldn't make us, and Dion was able to replace her at the last minute. So we haven't even known each other since 6 o'clock. Some of us just since about 6:29. And I say that because I found that that I want to say that, we sitting here as strangers, and my personal history has taught me that some of the most amazing conversations I've ever had have been with people I didn't know, who came from very different generations than I have and had different experiences and so on and so forth. And we sitting here with folks who have shared personal stories, not just about coming from different generations and being organizers, but in fact, the work that Courtland was involved in directly created the conditions for Chai to experience the world as she did, and the work that each of them did created the conditions for Dion to experience the world as he has. That's a phenomenal situation for us to be in this conversation. And so I want to take a second, and without asking anybody to respond to anybody, I want to ask if each of you might have a question you want to ask each other. And we'll come up with, we'll let each three of you raise a question, and then we'll let each of you respond to one of the questions. Certainly not all three, because we also want to try to create some time for folks in the audience to share. So we ask you all to type your questions into the Q&A box there down at the bottom of the screen. And so I want to start, and we'll start with Courtland this time. Courtland, you got any questions for your other two comrades here?
Yeah, I think, my big question is, over the next 5 or 10 years, what is it you see that's important? What are the things that you gonna try to emphasize? And what results are you hoping for over the next 5 to 10 years?
Thank you, Courtland. Thank you. Chai, you got a question? One question for your other comrade?
What's on your playlist?
I dig it. Thanks, Chai. Dion, you got a question?
What's your favorite place in the world?
All right, thank you. So we got 3 questions. We're gonna ask Chai to go first and pick one. We got, you could even answer your own question about what's on your playlist. What's your favorite place? And Courtland's question, over the next 5 years, what do you think is important? What do you plan on doing? And what do you hope to achieve? What do you hope the outcome will be?
Wow. I'll start with playlist. Everything from Ella Fitzgerald to, oh my God, I have so much stuff on there. Dion, I love all kinds of music. So I got just tons of stuff. I love what the youth are putting out today, because It's so real, it's so gritty, and yet there's love, there's aspiration. And so I was curious about your playlist to just kind of get a sense of where your head and where your heart is, because I think art is so important in movement making. Next 5-10 years, gee, there's still a lot of work to do here in Georgia. And you know, I think some folks have even already spoken to the issue of our state legislature currently trying to put forward proposals to strip away our voting rights even more, because we've been really successful with Stacey Abrams at the helm and a lot of other powerful women here in Georgia. Food insecurity is something that is something I want to address. I'm in the Master Gardener program to get my certification, and we have a volunteer garden that we can participate in that provides food to the surrounding community. My favorite place is actually in my backyard, where I have started to grow stuff myself, with the idea that we might need to feed ourselves. If anything, this last year has taught us is, if you have stuff to eat in your backyard, you don't have to go to the store, masked or unmasked. And the idea that people, food insecurity is a big issue in America, and it shouldn't be. And again, here in the South, there's lots of land, there's air, for us to grow. We should be able to feed people, and that's something that's on my heart, as work that I can see myself doing. And yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Charlie. Courtland?
I think, you know, I'm not, my playlist was interesting. I mean, I don't have a playlist with terms of my, well, I do have on my iPhone, but all the phone music I have is, you know, by Aretha Franklin and, you know, Luther Vandross and people like that. But to me, the album that I think is most important to me, and probably one of the best, most political albums I've ever heard, was Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. I mean, I think I still listen to that, and I see all the stuff going on today. You know, whether you're talking about environmental, whether you're talking about war, whether you're talking about a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, and the way he phrases it, you know, it's not a polemic, it's a, you know, what's happening, brother? How's the ball team doing? I mean, people having that conversation with each other. So I really like What's Going On. I think my favorite place, you know, I think I was very fortunate in my life, because when I was young, I traveled a lot. And Dion, let me just say, that's one of the things you should do while you're young, even not post-COVID. But I mean, my sense is that when you're young, you don't have to stay in the best places. You can sleep on the floor. You can, you know, walk. You can, I mean, so when I went to Morocco, I walked through the Casbah. You know, I went to Africa, I went to China. I mean, I went all over walking and going. I mean, I even went to from Europe to Africa, 4th class in a boat that only had 3 classes to it. So I was sleeping on a hammock, you know, in the front. And then when I got, I mean, what they did is every day you had a tin plate and they threw some slop in there. You had a loaf of bread and an orange, and that was it for the day. You almost like, so I mean, I was really traveling 4th class, you know, and I was really in the whole of a ship on a hammock. So I've been in a lot of places. And so I think at this point, for me, the place I like the best is my home, because I'm comfortable with myself. I don't have to, so wherever I am, in a lot of respects, wherever I am, that's my place. because that's where it is, not the place, but it's me. And that's what I enjoy. But I think at your age, get out, travel internationally, walk around, go to the cheapest way. Forget all that stuff with hotels that are great. Go to the cheapest way because you get to know people. And I think you're a person that's not going to be afraid of that. Let me just talk about the next 3 to 5 years. Over the next 3 to 5 years, I'm working on pulling together an intergenerational working group. And, I think we'll start with our first meeting is on March 3rd. And over the next 3 years, I want to look at what it will take politically and economically to begin to take us to the next level. We are in a different objective reality. When I was Dion's age, all we could do was protest. We couldn't do much more. Now, but when you look at, politically, if you're talking about Washington or Baltimore or Richmond or Columbia, South Carolina, they're all Black mayors. They're all people who have engaged in political power. But while they are there in these offices, our people are still hungry. Our people are still, how they need housing, healthcare and so forth. And at the end of the day, where the resources are that can help us and are supposed to help us as citizens exist, we don't really have access to it because we have no knowledge of it. So my sense is that, we need to understand what are the resources in the agriculture department that can help us do things. What are the resources in housing? What are the resources? So whether we're trying to get food stamps or trying to get $1 million for our business, what are the resources us as citizens who pay the taxes? How do we now get access to the resources? Because at the end of the day, the big problems for us are being able to have those things that allow us to live in a way that we should. So that's what I want to do over the next 3 years. Do the research, begin to understand how we begin to access the resources. Because, there was, and people asking why I want to do this. And I'm reminded of a question they asked Willie Sutton. And they kept asking Willie Sutton, why do you keep robbing banks? And Willie Sutton said, that's where the money is. And that's basically my perspective about where we need to be going.
Thank you, Courtland. Dion, we got 3 questions on the table. You can answer 1, you can answer 2, you can answer all 3. Over the next 5 years, what do you think is important? What do you want to be doing? What do you hope? What do you hope that the outcome will be or achieve? What's your favorite place, and what's on your playlist?
My favorite place, I think by like spirit, I wanted to say my grandma's house just because I put it there with my grandma. But I feel like I really enjoy being outside, just being in nature when it's warm specifically. So like if I could have my grandmother come with me out into nature, that would be my favorite place. My playlist, a lot of different things, actually kind of similar to y'all. I actually like Aretha Franklin, and I'll just list a bunch of people. I like Luther Vandross a little bit. I like Beyonce. I also like Funkadelic and Parliament, and I like Anderson .Paak, who is a current artist. Lion Babe, a current artist. I think Jasmine Sullivan has an amazing voice. I like Rochelle Farrell. I think she's a crazy artist. I love Miles Davis. I love Ledisi. I love just all types of music. I even started like studying a little bit of like sacred sound, like music that has no words, music that's one note, just to really get to the essence of like why this makes me feel so good. Yes, Hiatus Coyote is also amazing. So is Erykah Badu and Jill Scott. and D'Angelo, a political album. D'Angelo and the Vanguard, Black Messiah was amazing. It is amazing still. A Seat at the Table by Solange is and was amazing. Like the way that it sounds and feels and the lyrics. That's amazing. I am. Goodness. What do I want to see in the next 5? I heard 5 to 10 years initially. Sometimes my timing is off, and I think of things again like on small scales and big scales. There's a part of me that is so tired of the American government, or so tired of like the way the government systems move in general. That's one thing. What I would like to see is like the value being really placed in people and people's minds and their ability to do things that they're called to do to the fullest capacity. So I want to see people like, I really often think about how money is odd and how resources are real, but money is like a trap door for a bunch of different people. So I guess in a way, I would also like to see in what ways like we like raise our own value and like what we know and what we can build, what we can do, like growing our own food or working together to like build things. I don't a lot of these things have like they connect to each other, and there's also like disconnects because there's unanswered questions, or like I see the blockages, which I know I shouldn't focus on too much, but I would like to see the environment cleaned up. I would like to see people connect back to the environment as caretakers and creatives. I would like to see people travel. I would like to see people build jobs and build purposes, and to be able to do that and to be safe at the same time. I would like to see homelessness not exist. I would like to see people know both new and future forward information, as well as like ancient information that we already had that was able to like assist us in keeping ourselves well on all levels. What else?
Dion, we're gonna stop you there and thank you there, so we can I get the feeling that you can give us a long list, and I would love it. But I want us to also get to some more of these questions.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So we're going to move to the questions that you all in the audience have put forward. Thank you so much for the questions. They've been great. And I know we're all just loving this conversation and this unique opportunity. So there's a couple questions, and one is for Chai and Courtland and one for Dion. So I'll start with the question for Chai and Courtland, and it asks, how do younger generations challenge your thinking? Is there a recent example where someone younger made you think about something differently?
I am elated by the response of young people this summer, this fall, because while some of us who were older were afraid to maybe go to demonstrations and be possibly infected with COVID or whatever, I saw young folks showing up in mass, with masks, fighting. And that was very encouraging. There's something to be said, I think, about youth, having been one and then listening to Dion and hearing also what Courtland's experience. When you're younger, you have less fear, I believe. When you're younger, you're trying to find identity. Who am I? Where do I stand? What do I stand for? And I think when we're young, we're more creative. So what when I ask the question, what's on your playlist? I know that young folks have playlists. Older folks too, Courtland. I ain't not crossing you off the list, but I know that it's something that's often front of mind. And there's so much music out now that is around activism that asking that question would give me some insight, if you will, into some of your thinking. When you responded about some of the music that's out there, that's even just one note. Music is a vibration. How does vibration affect the plants I grow? Something as simple as that. But I listen to young folks because they're not just the future, but they're the present. And they have very much the same right to share their perspective because they actually have more invested in the future, than I do, quite honestly, by virtue of my years. So I'm always listening to learn what I can do differently, what I can do more, where I can put my energy. How can I help? I'm listening. I'm always listening because the world is yours, and I'm listening to you. I care about what's important to you. And when there are ways that I can assist, I certainly want to.
I talk to a lot of young people. I mean, I really do. And every day I'm really pleased and impressed. And I think it functions. I mean, it functions at a personal level, it functions at a political level, and then it functions at a political / sports level. And I want to kind of give you, I think let me talk about the three examples. I think that last year, because of COVID, we had to postpone the SNCC 60th anniversary convening. And to my surprise, we got a call from a bunch of young people saying, no, yeah, we postponed it, but you have got to continue your actions. We are demanding that you do these things with us. And it frankly caught me by surprise. I mean, to be frank, I just thought we were just postponing it, but they were making these demands. I think on the political level, while I know Stacey Abrams is celebrated in Georgia, the young person who I think that I look to and see and talk to all the time is Nsé Ufot, who was with the New Georgia Project. And she's the one that brought a lot of young people into the arena for Georgia to help make a big difference. And Nsé is a very, very serious sister. I mean, I find I've talked to, the thing I like about Nsé, and then there's a whole cohort, Trey Murphy, DeWanda Thompson, they're very serious people and they're ready for the long term. And finally, in terms of politics and sports, I'm impressed with LeBron James and his decision to stand up and impose his will on the NBA. I'm impressed with the women's basketball, not just one, but the whole group, because they're the ones who made a difference with Breonna Taylor. They're the ones, they're not only in the streets, they use their thing. And probably very impressive to me is Naomi Osaka, who, she did not have to associate herself with anybody. Her money is in Japan, nothing. But she had stood up and made a difference, not in basketball, but in tennis. So I'm really pleased with a lot. And, I watch and I'm thinking, people like LeBron and, the women's basketball, the WNBA and Osaka are doing things I could not dream of doing because we were not in the position to do it. But they're in a position to do it, and they were not afraid. They were not afraid to do what was necessary. So I'm impressed every day. So
I love it. And I think being close to young people, having conversations with young people and movements, like it's so beautiful Chai and Courtland, that you both are so active and engaged even still. I think it's those things that keep us hopeful and keep us fighting and engaged. So thank you for raising that. Dion, last but not least, we only have like 7 minutes, so I'm going to ask you to be brief before we close, and we're going to ask for a call to action from each of you. But I want to hear, Dion, have you had instances where older folks have challenged the way that you think, and maybe you've thought in one way and they kind of shifted and expanded your understanding? And you're on mute.
Right, you're right. Yes, I say yes so often. I think to not take too long, and an easy one is like maybe listening to Maya Angelou on YouTube, listening to her interviews and listening to her poetry, her interviews, just over the years, being able to just see her like living her experience on her journey. I think I resonated with like her and so many other people, but like seeing how my life might feel as a young person, or like what I can see around me, and not being assured in how powerful or how beautiful the life will become in the process. I think I have been pretty negative and like just I've been negative before, and like stayed in a space of like feeling victimized before, or like even in wanting to challenge myself, or being just strong enough to go further. What I was sitting in, or like what my mind was doing, was not helping. And it took like older people, like moving from people that I looked up on YouTube to like my director in City at Peace. She was able to like just to love on me and to love me in different ways, like to be able to say, you're really talented, or like that experience sucks, or like you're a hot mess. You should get it together. Yeah, she helped me to change my own mind, and she changed my mind, and she challenged me to start to think differently, in different ways, like to give myself more nurturing, and also to like give myself more honesty as well.
Beautiful, thank you. Everyone, this has been such a rich conversation, and I'm just truly, truly honored to be a part of it, and to be in a city that has benefited by the work that you've all done. So we want to close out, and the way we want to do that is, well, I'll send it over to Matt to wrap us up for the evening, and send us to let us know about upcoming dates and programs, because we have those scheduled for the rest of the year. And then I also want to ask panelists if you could have a call to action for the listeners, and ways that people can get involved in the work that you're passionate about, or that you're currently working on. So Matt, do you want to wrap up for us?
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Thanks, y'all. This has been a phenomenal conversation, and I want to thank all of y'all for showing up as you did, and having the conversation we had. I want to thank Claire for providing the captioning. I want to thank excuse me, Janelle Cooper and Mark Bretzfelder for their behind the scenes technological work. You know, the reason that this is as fly as it is, and you know, we had the dark cameras before they said our names. You know, Janelle and Mark are responsible for that, and they put in hard work, and I just want to, you know, acknowledge that and thank them for that. Moving forward, our next series, our next conversation will be Thursday, May 13th, and it is on community created food institutions in the history and present of Washington, D.C. And then September 16th, we'll be talking about environmental alternatives created in Washington, D.C. As a means to address the climate change and save ourselves from this system that is annihilating our ability to survive on Earth. And so you can check out Visionary Organizing Lab on Facebook, Visionary Organizing Lab. You can follow us on Twitter at visionary_lab. You can check out current movements on Facebook. And I believe I'm coming off the top of the head. So Katie, if I'm wrong, correct me. It is at current MVMT NTS, movements without an O, with no vowels, at current movements with no vowels. And so check us out. You can, you know, we both organizations have a whole lot of programming going on. So check us out. Yes, thank you, Janelle, once again for your tech support, and check out Black Swan Academy and SNCC 60. And we also want to give all of y'all just a chance to just, you know, plug and attract people to what you're doing before we get up out of here, and then we'll let Samir bring us home.
Well, one of the things that I forgot to mention is the importance of Black communities, Black businesses getting in on the hemp and CBD and businesses where heretofore it was criminalized, and many folks are serving time for possession and whatnot. But I am partner with a company called Malawi Plant and Oil. Our products are CBD infused and CBD tinctures, teas. I do teas that are hemp infused, and it's a, you know, people talk about a reckoning. A reckoning is coming, and so this is one of the ways where we can hopefully get our foot in the door. You know, the bus is leaving. You know, we're gonna have to run, but it's an opportunity for us to right some of the wrongs that we as Black folks in particular have experienced in relationship to the criminalization of cannabis and whatnot. So that's another thing that's been really important to me, being a part of this company that is saying we're going to sell these products because of their medicinal value. And that's the thing that people don't want to talk about. CBD has been helpful in everything from anxiety to helping people on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, feel a more calm and you just name it. You know, there's so many benefits, and we need to take that back and allow folks like us to get in on this fast-moving vehicle. So that's another thing that I'm interested in and participating in at this point in time.
Thanks, John. Dion, Courtland, anything y'all want to add?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm doing is working with young people to do two things: to look back over what they've done over the past 10 years and document it and put it in an archive so that it will be knowledgeable and available to people 20, 30 years from now. And also, as I said, working over the next 3 years to talk about how we deal with the various issues. And the only thing I would say is there was a song by, I think, Fleetwood Mac that used to say, "Don't stop thinking about tomorrow." And I think if I were to say anything, it's that. I mean, don't stop thinking about tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, the Black Swan Academy, we just had our annual youth retreat, and we're coming out with the Black Youth Agenda for this year, which is mainly just a year, but it can span over the next 2 or 3 years that they can be adjusted. So like a lot of things, let me actually grab my journal. But we're beginning to talk again about like what issues matter specifically for the young people, and homelessness is something that has gotten at the top of the list, as well as discrimination against queer folk that got at the top of the list, which is the first, well, not the first time that it has been mentioned, but the first time it's resonated so deeply that like we can focus on it and really give it the attention that it deserves, as well as community violence and gun violence. So over the next year or so, like you can visit the website, or you can visit the Instagram page that I put in there, and you can see the type of work that Black Swan Academy does. That will be things that will post in advance that you can attend or bring young people out for, or things that you can see the recap of. Mm-hmm. And that would be the best way to get involved.
Thank you, Dion. Thanks to the museum again, and I give you Samir McGill to take us home.
Thank you, Matt. And yeah, just thank you again, Dion Harrison, Chai Hughes, Courtland Cox, for the work you've done, the work that you're doing, and the work that you're going to continue to do. We're all benefiting from it. Thank you all who have joined us this evening for this conversation. I think it really is a powerful example of the possibility of intergenerational dialogue. And so I'm really happy that we've been able to do this, and that we'll continue to do it. Thank you to Katie Petitt and Current Movements, and Matt Birkhold and Visionary Organizing Lab for partnering with us on this. And yes, absolutely stay tuned to Anacostia Community Museum. You can check us out at anacostia.si.edu. We have free public programs every week. And to a topic that Chai brought up a short while ago, food insecurity, we have an upcoming exhibit opening in April outside at the museum called Food for the People, Eating and Activism in Greater Washington, that looks at some of this history in the greater DC area. So also keep an eye out for that. And yes, thank you all for joining us, and looking forward to future conversations with you all.
Okay, good day.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Have a good night.
So full. So full.